That eyesore of a view you think you own ends at the property line, and the property line is wherever this association says it is. That was Brenda Coyle, president of the Ridgewater Homeowners Association for 9 years running, standing in my driveway on a Tuesday morning in March of 2018, reading from a clipboard she held like a subpoena. The view she was talking about was the one my wife had loved for 30 years. The long, open run of grassland and the blue shoulder of Saddle Mountain past it, framed by nothing because nothing had ever stood between my front porch and that ridge. What Brenda did not know, what she never once thought to check in the 4 years she spent trying to wall me off from my own horizon, was that the empty lot she planned to build on did not belong to the developer she thought owned it. It had quietly come up for tax sale, and I had quietly bought it. So let me ask you something before I tell you the rest. If someone told you the sky you had looked at every morning for 3 decades was now theirs to sell, what would you have done? My name is Walt Brennan. I was 61 years old that March, a retired land surveyor who had spent 34 years walking boundaries for the county and a dozen private firms before I hung up my transit and my plumb bob for good. Surveying is a trade that gets into your hands. You learn to read a piece of ground the way other men read a face, to see where the water wants to go and where a fence ought to sit and where a corner pin is buried, even when the brush has grown over it. You learn that the ground does not lie, and that paper, when it is done right, does not lie either, and that almost every fight between 2 neighbors comes down to one of them believing something that the record flatly contradicts. I made my living on that gap for 34 years. I did not expect to be living inside it at 61. I live on 4.5 acres at the edge of what became the Ridgewater development. In a single-story house my wife Carol and I built with our own hands in 1986, back when the whole basin was ranch land, and the nearest neighbor was a mile of bunchgrass away. We poured the foundation ourselves over 2 weekends in August, Carol mixing while I screeded, both of us sunburned and laughing by the end of it. I framed the porch to face due west on purpose, because I had stood on that spot one evening with a level and a long view, and watched the last light climb the face of Saddle Mountain and turn it the color of a struck match. And I knew that was the room we would actually live in. We did. For 30 years, that porch was the best room in the house, and it had no walls on the side that mattered. Carol died in the fall of 2015, pancreatic and fast. 3 months from the afternoon the doctor said the word to the morning, I sat on the edge of the bed and held her hand and felt the warmth go out of it. Near the end, when the medicine made most of her foggy, she would still come clear sometimes in the early morning. And on one of those mornings, I wheeled her chair out to the west porch, and we watched the light come up over the ridge the way we had 10,000 times before. She was quiet a long while. Then she said she was glad we never let anybody put anything in the way of that mountain. She said it plain, the way she said everything, and she patted the back of my hand twice the way she did when a thing was settled. I told her I would keep it open. I made her that promise on that porch. And I am a man who keeps a folder for everything. Every easement and every fence line and every angry word a neighbor ever said to me across a property corner. And that promise went into the one folder I do not keep in the hall closet. I keep it in my chest, and I do not lose things. The development came in around 2009. The basin got carved into half-acre lots and cul-de-sacs with names like Aspen Glen and Mountain Vista Court, names somebody had clearly picked out of a brochure. And a man named Doug Coyle built about 40 of the houses through a company called Summit Ridge Development. His wife Brenda ran the homeowners association that governed those houses. I watched the whole thing go up from my porch over about 3 years, the graders and the water trucks and the framing crews, and I will tell you honestly that it did not bother me the way you might think. Land changes, ranches sell. A man who has spent his life setting the corners that let people divide property does not get to be sentimental about people dividing property. What bothered me came later, and it had nothing to do with the houses. My land was older than all of it. My deed was recorded in 1985. My acreage sat outside the platted subdivision boundary, and I had never signed a single covenant, never paid a dime in dues, never agreed to so much as the color of my own front door. I was not in their association. I had checked. The first month the surveyor's stakes went in along the Basin Road. I drove to the county office, paid my $4, and pulled the recorded plat of the Ridgewater subdivision and laid it on the hood of my truck in the parking lot and read it corner to corner. My 4.5 acres were not in it. The subdivision boundary stopped at the county road, and my line started on the far side of it. That is the kind of thing a man checks for himself instead of taking anybody's word, and it is the kind of thing I had checked 1,000 times for other people. Except this time, the parcel with my name on it was the one I was reading. I folded the plat, drove home, and filed a copy. That was years before any of the rest of it. The record was already sitting in my closet, waiting, the way records do. For a few years, Brenda mostly left me alone. I would see the white SUV roll the development streets in the evenings, slow, like a patrol. And now and then, a fine notice would go up on somebody's door over a boat trailer or paint color. But none of it reached across the county road to me. Then in the spring of 2018, she decided that the empty lot directly across the road from my porch, the one that sat between me and the ridge, needed what she called a community sound and privacy barrier. A wall, an 8-foot block wall running the length of that lot, which would stand square in the middle of the only view Carol ever asked me to protect. The lot was zoned inside the development. Doug had platted it years back and never built on it, and Brenda had decided it was time to dress up the entrance to Ridgewater with a wall and a monument sign and a row of arbor vitae. And if that wall happened to erase my horizon, well, that was, in her words, an aesthetic improvement I should be grateful for. She came to tell me about it herself. That was the Tuesday in March. The clipboard. The line about the property line being wherever the association said it was. She had parked the white SUV at an angle across the bottom of my driveway, the way people park when they want you to understand they will not be staying long, because they do not expect any back and forth. She wore a linen blazer in a hard magenta over yoga pants, with a string of pearls and a pair of sunglasses pushed up into a sharp blonde bob. And she had on white sneakers that had never seen a day of dirt, which is a thing you notice when you have spent your life standing in the actual dirt. I stood on my own gravel with a coffee mug going cold in my hand, and I let her finish. She read me the whole thing off the clipboard, the privacy barrier, the entrance corridor, the community standards, the timeline. Then I said one thing. I said the lot she wanted to build on was not hers to build on, and she should check the title before she poured a footing. She smiled the way you smile at a child who has said something quaint. She told me the association had full authority over the entrance corridor, that the parcel was functionally part of their jurisdiction, and that a retired fence walker like me would do well to remember that the people who keep property values up are the people who decide what stays and what goes. She said the word fence walker like she had been saving it. Then she got into the white SUV with a vanity plate that read RDGWTR1 and backed out of my driveway and drove the 200 yards back into the development, slow like a patrol. I went inside and I started a folder. Manila, the kind I have a whole box of in the hall closet. The same kind I had filed 34 years of boundary disputes in. I wrote the date on the tab in pencil, March 2018. I wrote down what she had said as close to word for word as I could remember it. The property line being wherever the association said it was. the functionally part of our jurisdiction, the fence walker. Then I did the thing I have done after every property dispute, every boundary argument, every angry neighbor in 34 years of surveying. I wrote the facts under the words, separated by a line, so that anybody reading it later could tell what was said from what was true. The lot across the road was tax parcel 14-0277. It had been platted by Summit Ridge in 2010, but never improved. I knew that parcel. I had run the original boundary for the rancher who sold the whole basin back in 1984. And I knew exactly where its corners were because I had set them myself with my own hands when I was a younger man, with a stronger back, a steel chain, and a summer to do it in. Here is the part Brenda never checked. Doug Coyle's company had stopped paying the property taxes on parcel 14-0277 sometime around 2014, when the development's money got tight and the unbuilt lots became a line item nobody wanted to carry. I did not have to guess at that. I read the legal notices. I read them every quarter. The small print back pages of the county paper where the tax delinquency lists and the plat amendments and the variance requests run. Because an old surveyor never really retires. He just stops getting paid for it. My eyes go down those columns the way another man's eyes go down the box scores. The county had carried the delinquency on 14-0277 for the full legal period, posted the notices on the courthouse board, and run them in the paper 3 weeks running, and put the parcel up for tax sale in the fall of 2017. I saw it on the list in September of that year. Parcel 14-0277, Summit Ridge Development, delinquent. I sat at my kitchen table with the paper folded to that column, and I thought about the lot, the empty lot between my porch and the ridge, the one I had set the corners on as a young man. I thought about Carol on the porch. Then I went and pulled my own copy of the plat and confirmed the legal description against the notice. Because you do not bid on a parcel you have not personally tied to the ground. And I drove out the next morning and walked it one more time and found the northeast iron pin right where I had left it in 1984, sound in the bunch grass. I went to the courthouse on the morning of the sale in October, and I sat through 40 minutes of other people's delinquencies before they called the parcel. And I bid. And nobody bid against me, because nobody else in that room had any idea what that empty lot was about to become. I bought the lot between my porch and the ridge for $9,400 and the cost of the back taxes. The deed recorded in November of 2017. 4 months before Brenda Coyle stood in my driveway and told me she was going to build a wall on it. I did not tell her that. You do not tell a person who has decided not to check the deed that the deed is already against them. You let them build the case for you. So I filed her visit. I dated it, and I waited. The deed went in the folder. Behind the plat, behind the notice. The folder had 3 things in it, and one of them was already the ending. She just did not know it. The first notice came in April. A letter on Ridgewater letterhead, signed by Brenda as president, informing me that the association had approved construction of the entrance barrier and that I would need to remove a section of my own split rail fence to allow their contractor access to stage materials. My fence, on my land. I wrote back 1 paragraph, polite, declining, and I noted that the staging lot they intended to use was privately owned, and they should confirm permission from the owner. I did not say I was the owner. I dated the letter and filed it. That was incident 1. In May, a man in an orange vest showed up with a transit and started setting stakes on parcel 14-0277. I watched him from the porch for a few minutes, the way he sighted his line and drove his lath, and I will say he was competent, which somehow made it worse. I walked across the road with my own steel tape and my old field book under my arm. I asked him who he was working for. He said Summit Ridge. I asked him if Summit Ridge had given him a current title commitment for the parcel. He looked at me the way a man looks when the question is one he has not been given an answer to, and he said that was above his pay grade. I told him, friendly enough, that he was setting stakes on private property without the owner's consent, and that he might want to confirm his client actually held title before he billed anybody for the work. Because a survey on a parcel your client does not own is a survey nobody pays for. He chewed on that. Then he packed up his transit and left. I wrote it all down: the date, the time, the orange vest, the company name, and the stakes I pulled and stacked neatly at the edge of the road in a bundle so nobody could ever say I'd scattered them or thrown them. Incident 2. The escalation after that came in steps, the way these things always do, each one a little further over the line. By June, the association had sent me a fine. $250 for what the notice called obstruction of a community improvement project, because I had asked the surveyor to confirm title. I read it twice to be sure I had it right, that they were fining a non-member for asking a contractor a question on the non-member's own land. I did not pay it. I filed it. Incident 3. In July, they sent another one, $500 this time, doubling for non-payment, with a letter warning that continued non-compliance could result in a lien against my property. A lien against land that was not in their association, that they had no contractual relationship with, that they had never had a single legal hook into. I wrote one paragraph back, polite, stating that I was not a member of the association and was not subject to its assessments, and that any lien filed against my parcel would be answered with a quiet title action and a demand for fees. I dated it and filed my copy. Incident 4. My daughter Nora was 16 that summer. She had come to live with me full-time after Carol died, and the two of us had built a quiet life around the house and the shop and the long view. The kind of life where you each know what the other is going to say before they say it. She was the one who started photographing everything. She had a good eye, my girl, and a better head than I had at her age. She would see the white SUV roll up the road, and she would be out on the porch with her phone before I knew anyone was there, filming, narrating quietly under her breath the date and the time and what she was seeing, the way I had taught her to narrate a field measurement so the record would make sense to a stranger a year later. She kept the footage on her phone and copied it to a thumb drive in the kitchen drawer. 2 copies, because I had told her once that a record that exists in only one place does not really exist. She rolled her eyes at me when I said things like that. She had a way of doing it, a slow tip of the head that was so exactly her mother's that it stopped my breath some days. Then she did the thing anyway. She always did the thing anyway. That is how I knew it had taken. In August, the fake inspector came. A man in a polo shirt with a laminated badge clipped to his pocket knocked on my door on a Thursday morning and announced he was there to perform a compliance walkthrough of my property on behalf of the Ridgewater Architectural Committee. I asked to see the badge. He handed it over with the small reluctance of a man who has never been asked. It was a printed card in a plastic sleeve, the kind you can order off the internet for $9, with the word Inspector across the top and a logo that was not any county seal I had ever seen. And I have seen all of them. I handed it back. I told him no county or municipal inspector had any business being sent by a homeowners association I did not belong to, and that he was welcome to leave the way he came. He told me Brenda Coyle had personally authorized the inspection and that obstructing it was a violation. Nora was filming from the front window, low, behind the curtain, and I could see the small red light of the phone over his shoulder. I told him again to leave. He looked at the house and at the camera he had not noticed until that second, and he left. I filed it. Incident 5, and the first one that made the back of my neck go cold. Because a fine is just paper. A fine is a person testing you. But a fake badge is a person deciding the rules do not apply to them anymore. And a person like that does not stop at a door. That same month, I started to understand why Brenda wanted that wall so badly. And it was not about my view at all. Nora found it, actually, going through the county planning portal for a school project on local government, which is a sentence I am still proud of saying out loud. She was clicking through the public filings, and she called me over to the kitchen table and turned the laptop so I could see. Summit Ridge Development had filed for a zoning variance to build a second phase of Ridgewater, 18 new lots, on the back 40 acres of the basin. I read the application twice. The only legal road access to that back 40, the only way to get a grader and a fire truck and 18 driveways worth of traffic in and out, ran along the edge of parcel 14-0277. The wall was never a privacy barrier. I sat there at the table and felt the whole thing turn over in my head and land right side up. The wall was the first stage of a road, a graded entrance corridor dressed up as an aesthetic improvement that would let Doug Coyle open up Phase 2 and sell 18 more half-acre lots at the top of the market. The fines, the inspector, the pressure, none of it was ever about a view or a fence color. Brenda needed control of that parcel to make her husband's 18 lots happen. And she had simply assumed, the way she assumed everything, that the empty lot was theirs because it had always been theirs, and because no one had ever made her check. Nora looked at me across the table. She asked if we owned it. I told her we did, that I'd bought it a year ago and not said a word. And she sat back in her chair and let out a long breath and said, quietly, that we should probably keep filming everything. We kept filming everything. I want to be careful here, because the deputy who eventually helped me was not a friend doing me a favor, and I will not paint him as one. His name was Ray Alvarez, the county sheriff's deputy. And the first time he came out, it was because Brenda had called in a complaint that I was harassing her contractors. He came up the driveway in a tan county truck, unhurried, and he took my statement on the porch with his hat in his hand. Polite, careful. The way a man is when he does not yet know which of two people in front of him is the problem. I did not argue with him. I went inside and brought out the folder, and I laid it open on the porch table. And I walked him through the dates and the photographs and the copies of the fines in order. He read for a while without saying anything. Then he told me something I have never forgotten. He said a filed complaint has to be answered no matter how thin it is, that the badge requires him to roll on it, whether there is anything behind it or not, and that the only thing that ever actually settles a dispute like this is a clean, documented pattern that a judge or a board can read in 5 minutes and understand. Build the record, he said. He told me that if there were a few more documented incidents, he could establish a pattern of harassment on his end. And he wrote his own report on the spot and tore off the carbon and handed me the case number. I added it to the folder. The folder was getting thick, and now it had a case number on the inside cover. September. Brenda came back herself, and this time she brought Doug. They parked the white SUV across the road and stood at the edge of parcel 14-0277 with a rolled set of plans under Doug's arm, pointing at the lot, measuring it with their eyes. When I walked out to the end of my driveway, Brenda turned and pointed past me at the house and said, loud enough that I knew she meant for Nora to hear it from the porch, that the wall was going up before the first frost, whether the bitter old man across the road liked it or not, and that if I interfered, she would personally see to it that my taxes were reassessed and my road access reviewed, and my life made very, very difficult. She said it with her chin up, enjoying it. Doug said nothing. He stood a step behind her, and he looked at the ground, and he turned the roll of plans over and over in his hands. A man who looks at the ground while his wife threatens a widower is a man who already suspects something is wrong and has decided not to ask the question because he is afraid of the answer. I did not give him the answer. I said nothing at all, which I have found unsettles that kind of person more than anything you could say back. I turned around and walked up my own driveway, and behind me I heard the SUV doors close. I filed it that night, the thread about the taxes word for word. Incident 6. 3 after Ray's threshold, if anyone was counting, and I was always counting. In October, the contractors came with the bolt cutters. This is the one Nora got the cleanest because she heard the truck before I did, down in the shop. And she was already filming from the porch when the 2 men got out of a white work truck and walked up to my field gate with a long-handled cutter between them. One of them lifted the jaws to the chain that held my own gate shut, the chain I had run through that gate for 30 years. My gate, on my driveway, on my deeded land that had nothing to do with their association at all. I came out of the shop faster than a man my age has any business moving, wiping my hands on a rag, and I crossed the yard and put myself between the men and the gate. I told them to set the cutters down and get off my property. I kept my voice level, because I have learned that a level voice frightens that kind of hired man more than a shout does. Since a shout he can tell himself is just an old man losing it, and a level voice he cannot. One of them said Brenda Coyle had told them the gate was an unauthorized obstruction in the entrance corridor and needed to come down. I told him the gate was on private land, that the man telling them it was a corridor did not own the corridor, and that the whole thing was being recorded, 2 copies, by my daughter on the porch behind me. I pointed at Nora without looking away from them. They looked. They saw the phone up and steady and the red light on. They had signed up to cut a chain off an empty gate for a contractor's fee, and they had not signed up for a man standing on his own recorded deed with his daughter filming. And after a moment, the one with the cutters lowered them. They left the cutters lying in the dirt by the gatepost and got in the truck and backed out and drove off. I picked the cutters up and set them inside the shop, dated, because they were evidence now, not a tool. Nora came down off the porch, and her hands were shaking when she lowered the phone, and I put my arm around her shoulders, and we stood there a minute, looking at the gate. That was the night I stopped waiting. Incident 7, and the last one. Because a person who will send strangers to cut the chain off your gate is not a person who stops on their own. I called Ray the next morning, and I told him I wanted to file a formal complaint of attempted trespass and property damage. And I told him I was prepared to bring the full record to the next county commission meeting, where Summit Ridge's Phase 2 variance was on the public agenda for a vote. He said that was exactly the right venue. He said, "Bring everything." The commission met on the 3rd Tuesday of November in the county building, in a room with folding chairs and a long dais and a court reporter at a little machine taking it all down. I wore a clean shirt and I brought 1 folder. Nora came with me and sat in the 2nd row. Doug Coyle's variance for the 18 lots was item 4 on the agenda, and we sat through items 1 through 3, a road dedication, and 2 minor plats, while my hands rested flat on the folder in my lap. Brenda sat in the front row in a magenta blazer with a string of pearls, the same hard color she had worn in my driveway in March. And when the chair opened the floor for public comment on the access corridor, she stood up first. She told the commission that the entrance improvement was fully within the association's authority, that the corridor parcel was, and I am quoting her because the court reporter caught it word for word, and it is in the public record to this day, functionally part of our jurisdiction, and that an uncooperative adjacent landowner had been obstructing a lawful community project for the better part of a year. She used my name and the word obstructing in the same sentence. She sat back down, looking very pleased with herself, and she did not once look across the aisle at me, because she had decided a year ago that I was a fence walker, and there was nothing about me worth looking at. Then they called my name. I am not a man who makes speeches. The whole drive over, Nora had asked me what I was going to say, and I had told her the truth, that I was not going to say much of anything, that the paper would do the talking, the way it always had. I walked up to the little podium with the one manila folder, and I did not raise my voice, and I did not look at Brenda. I opened the folder and laid a single sheet of paper flat on the podium, and I asked the clerk if she would read the recording stamp at the top of the page into the record. It was the deed to parcel 14-0277, recorded November of 2017. Grantee Walter J. Brennan. I said that the parcel the association proposed to build a wall on, the parcel the entire Phase 2 access corridor depended on, had been sold at county tax auction a year earlier for non-payment of taxes by Summit Ridge Development, and that I had purchased it at that sale, and that I held clear recorded title in my own name. I said the wall could not be built and the road could not be graded, because the only legal access to the back 40 ran across land that belonged to me, and I had no intention of selling it or granting an easement across it. I closed the folder. I did not say one word more. The room went quiet in that particular way. A room goes quiet when a great many people understand the same thing at the same moment. And I let the quiet sit, because I had been waiting a year for it, and I was in no hurry. The county attorney leaned into her microphone and asked the clerk to confirm the recording. The clerk pulled it up on the county system right there on the screen at the front of the room, where everyone could see it. Parcel 14-0277, tax deed, grantee Walter J. Brennan. Recorded the date I had said, to the day. The county attorney turned in her chair and looked at Doug Coyle, who had gone the color of old paper, and asked him, on the record, whether Summit Ridge held any current interest in the corridor parcel. Doug stood up slowly, with everyone watching. He said he would have to check with his title company. The county attorney said evenly, that was not a yes. She let that sit too. Then she advised the commission that a variance for a development with no demonstrated legal access could not be acted on. And the chair tabled item 4, which is the polite way a county kills a thing. The variance died right there in the folding chairs. A variance for a development with no legal access is not a variance. It is a wish, and wishes do not get recorded. The consequences were not mine to deliver, and I did not deliver them. I never sent a letter, never filed a counterclaim, never so much as raised my voice across the road. The consequences fell on Summit Ridge the way water finds the low ground, on their own, by gravity, because that is what overreach does when the fact under it finally shows. Without legal access, the Phase 2 project simply collapsed. The 18 lots Doug had already borrowed against could not be developed and could not be sold. And the bank that held the construction note read the same public record everyone else had read at the commission meeting and called the loan. By the following spring, Summit Ridge Development had filed for bankruptcy protection, and the framing crews and the water trucks I had watched come into the basin a decade earlier did not come back. The fake inspector and the men with the bolt cutters became their own kind of problem. Ray Alvarez had built his pattern, and once the variance died and the story went around the county, the sheriff's office opened an inquiry into the fraudulent compliance inspection and the attempted entry at my gate. And a man does not enjoy being asked under oath who printed the badge and who gave the order to cut the chain. A board member of the association, a younger woman who had voted for none of it and had grown sick of all of it, came forward on her own and gave a statement about how the fines against me had been approved. And the local paper that ran the tax delinquency lists I read every quarter ran a front-page story about the whole affair, which is a circle I appreciated more than I let on. Brenda Coyle resigned the association presidency she had held for 9 years, rather than answer the neighbors' questions at the next open meeting. The fines they had levied against me, every dollar of them, were voided in a single line of a settlement I never had to sign, because there had never been anything behind them in the first place, only the assumption that nobody would check. The wall was never built. The monument sign and the row of arborvitae were never planted. The view stayed open. Past my porch, the grassland still runs unbroken to the blue shoulder of Saddle Mountain, exactly the way it ran the morning Carol asked me to keep it that way. And I sit out there most evenings and watch the same light she watched go up the same face of the same mountain. I will give you the 2 numbers, because they sat side by side in that room, and you could feel the gap between them. Across 4 years, the association had levied against me a running total of $11,200 in fines, doubled penalties, and threatened liens, of which I had paid exactly 0. And the parcel they needed to make 18 lots and several $1 million happen had been bought out from under them at the county courthouse for $9,400, a full year before they ever served me the first notice. $11,200 against 0. $9,400 against everything they were trying to build. They had spent 4 years in a development company fining a man for standing on his own land, while the ground under their whole plan was already deeded, recorded, and filed in a manila folder in his hall closet. Nora is in college now, studying public policy, which I think is her revenge on every clipboard that ever came up our road. The summer after the commission meeting, she and I walked the corners of parcel 14-0277 together, the lot I had surveyed as a young man and bought back as an old one, and I showed her the original iron pins I had set in 1984, still there in the bunch grass, exactly where the law said they would be. She took a picture of the one in the northeast corner. She keeps it on her phone. 2 copies, she told me. And she did not roll her eyes when she said it. So here is what I want you to take from this, plainly, because it is the whole point, and I am not going to dress it up. The people who lose these fights are almost always the people who never check the document. Brenda Coyle spent 4 years and her husband's company on a wall she had no right to build, on a lot she never once confirmed she owned, because she believed authority was the same thing as a fact. It is not. Authority is a costume. A fact is recorded at the county, and it does not change its mind. Go pull your own deed today, this week, and pay your $4 and read the legal description out loud, and then walk it against the ground until you know exactly where your corners are, because the day you need to know is not the day to start looking. Pull the plat for anything they build near you. Read the tax delinquency notices in your county paper, the small print on the back pages nobody reads, because the empty lot somebody is bullying you over may be one missed payment away from being yours. Keep a folder. Date everything in pencil on the tab. Make 2 copies of anything that matters, one of them somewhere else, and teach the kid in your house to do the same, even when they roll their eyes, especially when they roll their eyes. Authority that will not check the record cannot survive the record. That is the whole law of it. If you have got a story about an association or an office that tried to take something that was never theirs, put it in the comments, because I read them and I learned from them. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one, and the next one is about a retired water rights examiner whose HOA tried to drain the pond his grandfather dug, and the 100-year-old decree they never knew existed. I will see you then. Keep your corners and keep your records.